Hello and welcome to Hot and Heavy, the Elaine Menace podcast. I'm your host, Shivani Desai. Today I'll be talking about Season 6, Episode 6, The Gymnast. Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome my voice back. It's back to normal, finally. Guess who's back? Back again. Oh, God, I'm sorry. I don't know why I did that. This is just the mood I'm in. I'm going to bust into Eminem songs, apparently. So maybe we should just skip banter so that I can avoid that. Although I did want to mention, if you guys listened last week, I mentioned JLD has a new podcast out called Wiser Than Me. Well, she released 2 episodes with Jane Fonda and Isabel Allende, which last week I said Allende, and I'm very embarrassed. Anyway, they're incredible episodes. They're incredible women. So if you missed last week, this is a podcast JLD made in order to give a voice to older women to share their wisdom, because we do that with men. They're always so revered. Oh, these older men, we need to hear from them, but we don't hear that much from women who get older. I mean, we devalue women so much as they get older, and it's bullshit. And JLD agrees with me. I mean, I should say I agree with JLD on that. She's come up with this podcast. But anyway, I highly, highly recommend it. Those episodes are fantastic. She also, at the end of every episode, she calls her mom to talk about the interview she just had. And like, oh my God, her mom is adorable. I just love everything about it. And I'm excited to hear more. And yeah, JLD, no surprise. I guess I shouldn't say that, because I've heard podcasts with famous actors as hosts. It's not always successful. No, it doesn't mean that you're a good interviewer or a good podcaster. So I will give credit to JLD. She knows how to do it seamlessly. She's amazing at it. So I love hearing her voice. She's just as adorable as you'd think. She's as badass as you'd think. She's amazing. Just so good. So I highly recommend it. Wiser Than Me. And I think maybe if you're a dude out there listening to this and you think, oh, it's not going to be for me, it's all about older women and giving advice to women. No, it's really just life advice. Anyone can benefit from it. And if you are a man, you should listen to it so that you can hear a woman's perspective on aging, on their place in society, what they've been through, especially these older women, through such chauvinistic times and times where women were not taken seriously. Ooh, I'm getting impassioned. Sorry. No, I'm not going to say sorry. Fuck that. I'm not sorry. Okay. Well, I do need to calm down a little bit. But anyway, back to my point. I love the podcast. I highly recommend it. So Wiser Than Me. Look for it wherever you find your podcasts. All right, let's get into this episode. The synopsis for The Gymnast is as follows. Jerry is excited about having sex with a Romanian Olympic gymnast, but his own performance in bed ends up disappointing her. Elaine has to represent Mr. Pitt in a deal after he becomes obsessed with 3D art posters. The mother of George's girlfriend mistakenly thinks George behaves like a homeless man, while Kramer suffers through the passing of a kidney stone. This episode was written by Alec Berg. Alec Berg. Did you turn in your assignment, Mr. Berg? And Jeff Schaefer. All right, we start out in Jerry's apartment. George is saying how Lindsay is giving him another chance after his book club failure. This is the girlfriend we saw at the tag of the last episode who caught George talking about Breakfast at Tiffany's, the movie, rather than the book at the book club meeting. So yeah, he's back in, and he's actually going to meet her mother later. Jerry remarks, "You're good with the mothers." And George says, "If I could talk to the mothers and have sex with the daughters, we'd really have something there." Kramer enters. He needs a hammer for his 3D art poster. Elaine's actually having it framed for him because Mr. Pitt was having a bunch of stuff framed. Jerry mentions, "Hey, you know that woman you saw me with? She's actually an Olympic gymnast." Kramer is really excited for him. A gymnast. Think of the flexibility. Face-melting sex, he says. Well, Jerry's not that into it. He's probably going to bail. What are they going to talk about? She's Romanian. And he can't just be in it for the sex. George exits the bathroom, putting his shirt back on. And apparently that's what he does when he, goes to the office. AKA takes a dump. What for? Jerry asks. It frees me up. No encumbrances. Kramer gets this attack of pain in his side, and Jerry's like, hey, if you keep getting these attacks, you need to go to a doctor. Kramer exits. Yeah. And Jerry's still not over George's shirtless dumping. So he's like, you know what? Knowing you is like going to the jungle. I don't know what I'm going to find, and I'm real scared. Next, we're in Mr. Pitt's office. Mr. Pitt asks Elaine to proofread a report for him. It's for a meeting with the Poland Creek Bottled Water Company. What meeting? Elaine just doesn't know what's going on. I told you. He sits on the board of trustees with Morgan Springs. They're trying to acquire Poland Creek. She tries to grab the paper from him, but he hangs on because he notices, are you using a fountain pen? Yeah. They smear. He says, under no circumstances is ink to be used in this office. All right, I'll use a pencil, Mr. Pitt. Kramer enters. She tells him where his framed poster is. They're all wrapped up. And so he keeps just ripping through all of them until he finds his, irritating Elaine in the process. She's like, all right, just take it. I've got a lot of work to do. Mr. Pitt enters and sees Kramer's poster. Well, this is very odd. Kramer tells him that, it's a 3D art poster, and Mr. Pitt is fascinated. Kramer tries to help him to see the 3D image. Blur your eyes. You got to stare straight through the picture. And Kramer sees it within a few seconds. Oh, yeah. Mr. Pitt still isn't seeing it. Elaine tries to get Kramer to leave. Look, Mr. Pitt has a lot of work to do, although he's still really into it. Ooh, but then Kramer gets another attack and has to leave. Oh, mama. My take on this scene, there's not a ton going on here as far as interesting things with Elaine, but we are getting a lot of setup for what's to come between Mr. Pitt, Elaine, and the fountain pen. We do keep seeing more and more eccentricities with Mr. Pitt, but this one isn't new. We learned about his preference of pencils to pens back in the Big Salad episode when Elaine had to get him his fancy Rolomex 1000. But I like that they bring it back so we can see how passionate he is. We know he likes the mechanical pencil, but I like that we get to see his total aversion to ink. I love their dynamic. I've said this before, and it really just came to light with my rewatching the show for the podcast. Their dynamic, Mr. Pitt and Elaine's dynamic it's one of the best of the series. I love that he's always a bit annoyed with her, no matter what. Like from the start of a conversation, it's never just like, hey, Elaine, but then he becomes annoyed. No, he starts out annoyed with Elaine. I like seeing Mr. Pitt and Kramer interact. It's an odd combination. I don't think we see it again, but I kind of enjoyed that for this episode. And just on a personal note, I was a master at Magic Eye 3D posters. Okay. The fact that this made it into the episode in a show that was very careful about not doing things that were too trendy or, of the time, they try to make this show kind of evergreen. But oh my gosh, 3D art posters, it was a real phenomenon. They were everywhere. Everyone at least had a couple in their house or had a book of them. It was pretty common in the mid-90s. And I always felt pretty full of myself that I could just unfocus my eyes at that perfect level. I would always beat everyone else to that 3D experience. I was really good at it, you guys. Look, I don't have a lot of things to brag about myself, but I will brag about this. I do not, however, ironically, I do not enjoy 3D movie experiences at all. All right, next we're at Mrs. Enright's house, Lindsay's mother. George is charming the room. Lindsay's mother, her nana, her aunt, they're all laughing at something he said. Mrs. Enright's like, it's so nice to finally meet you. George offers to help clean up, and when he goes into the kitchen, he finds an eclair in the trash and decides to pick it up and take a bite. Right at that moment, Mrs. Enright walks in and sees him eating out of the trash. She's horrified and leaves with George chasing her. Mrs. Enright! Mrs. Enright! The actress who plays Mrs. Enright is Lois Nettleton, and Lois was a highly successful theater actress and guest starred in TV shows such as The Love Boat, Golden Girls, and Crossing Jordan. And a fun piece of trivia, she was married to Gene Shepherd, who any Christmas Story fans out there would know as the narrator of that movie. Loved that. And I love her as Mrs. Enright. She's the perfect sweet mother. I love the way she's, George, you are such a gentleman. It's so, like, she's so overly excited about George. It's so good. And I also have to give kudos to Lois Nettleton's face acting. She has a lot of that in this episode, and she does it with, dare I say, JLD level perfection. All right, next we're at Mr. Pitt's office again. Elaine is spotting the 3D image in the poster. She's amazed. That is so cool. And this is only frustrating Mr. Pitt more. Where is it? Right here. I'm looking there. No, unfocus. I am unfocused. There's a phone call, Elaine answers, and the car is there to pick up Mr. Pitt for the meeting. He's so distracted by this poster, he doesn't even remember. What meeting? The Poland Creek merger. He doesn't want to take his eyeballs off of this poster, and he suggests that Elaine go in his place, saying all they're going to do is read the report. Mr. Pitt, I don't think that's such a good idea. Damn this thing! My take on this scene, I love Elaine chewing gum. This is such a little thing, but it has to be intentional. I've said this before. Every little choice on a show, everything is thought about. So I'm sure it was a conscious choice by the production to make her chew gum like this. And I think my hypothesis, I guess, as to why they decided this, it just makes her seem that much younger and out of Mr. Pitt's world. A small thing like that just separates who he is from who she is. It's such a nice touch because not only does she seem like that age gap is just that much more pronounced, but just her maturity level is way off from his. It's like I said, a really nice touch, a subtle thing, but that's really, really effective. The level of Mr. Pitt's frustration is so funny. I love how seriously he's taking this. He's so, again, the eccentricities just keep piling on, and I love it. And I gotta hand it to Ian Abercrombie here. He's got some face acting going on too. It's another level. All of the expressions he makes while he's staring at that poster, they're priceless. All right, next we're in Jerry's car. He's on his date with Katya, the gymnast, and he's trying to make conversation. Brings up Ceausescu, the ruthless Romanian dictator. And they chat a little bit about Ceausescu and then nothing. Very, very bad. The actress who plays Katya is Alina Lowenson. She's worked mostly in indie films and shorts, but she also did have a role in Schindler's List. I just wanted to mention that. Another little Seinfeld connection there. I'm not a fan of this character at all, or this storyline. So I'm going to sound really harsh about Alina. She doesn't really do anything that wrong or badly, but I just don't enjoy anything about this performance. Again, it's definitely more the circumstance of this plot and the character, but I just have no interest in Katya. So Alina Lowenson is just an unfortunate byproduct. My criticism of her is just because I just cannot stand the character. All right, next we're at Monk's. Jerry is trying to understand how the hell George eats out of the trash. George tries to defend himself, but Jerry is convinced, now he's crossed the line to bum. Kramer enters. He seems a little bit troubled, and he explains to them that he has a kidney stone and that it has to get passed eventually through the urine. Of course, Jerry's got to say, boy, that's got to hurt. Next, we're at the merger meeting. Elaine is sitting with two businessmen who are explaining the details of the merger, including the stock swap. This amuses Elaine. Let's swap some stock. One of them hands some documents to Elaine for Mr. Pitt with the message that they plan to be in full production by the spring. As they're getting up to leave, she asks, hey, what's the new name going to be? Moland Spring. Ew, Elaine hates that. She'd never drink anything named Moland. Well, they tell her it was Mr. Pitt's idea. Oh, she tries to take it back, but the damage is done. We've got to do something about that name. My take on this scene, again, she's still chewing the gum, super effective still. It's like Elaine reverts back to an immature teenager around Mr. Pitt and men like him, which makes me think of her daddy issues. And that's a little too deep to go into, I understand. But that's just, again, my taking this character way too seriously. And I agree with her about this name. It sounds like Moland. It sounds like a land of moles. And that's gross. All right, next we're at Jerry's apartment. George is on the phone with Lindsay explaining the garbage eclair incident. And Jerry's sitting next to him reacting to everything he's saying. And kudos to Jerry's face acting here too. A lot of face acting in The Gymnast. Well, George somehow convinces her and gets off the phone. And Jerry says, you know what? Get her some flowers too. And George is totally down with that. Kramer enters with a video of Katya's Olympic performance. He will not back off Jerry that he needs to sleep with her because of her gymnastic skills. Jerry tries to explain that, look, he's just not that type of guy. But then they start watching the tape, and we can hear Katya's routine going on while Kramer narrates the entire thing with all the technical gymnastics terms. And he does it to the point of what sounds like completion for him, if you know what I mean. And then he exits, leaving George and Jerry mouths agape. Just a side note here. This is such a big pet peeve of mine since this episode aired. As a former gymnast, it's okay. I can't even believe I said that with a straight face. I think I quit gymnastics at the age of 8. But anyway, former gymnast and lover of watching Olympic gymnastics. I love gymnastics. It's like my favorite thing to watch in the Olympics. I fucking hate that you can hear her grunting in this video. You don't hear that when you're watching Olympic gymnastics or any gymnastics. Even if you're in person, you hear the squeakies of the apparatus. You hear the, the kind of, okay, maybe not that, but you hear the equipment. You don't hear, It's so stupid. I just was like, come on, who approved that? It sounds so ridiculous. All right, next we're in Jerry's car. And Jerry is looking at Katya with fresh eyes. He's definitely more attracted to her now after seeing the gymnastics video. He's asking Katya how she stayed on that beam. And then her vibe's actually a little bit more seductive. She starts bragging about how she can balance herself in any position. But of course, those skills are only useful for gymnastics. Oh boy. All right, next we're at Jerry's apartment. Well, it's the morning after. Jerry's telling Elaine how disappointing the sex was. It was just so ordinary. It was definitely not a magical world of sensual delights. Elaine asks, well, what are you expecting? Well, he's a little hesitant about explaining, and she starts kind of filling in the blanks. What, do you think she was going to take some of that chalk? Or, no, this is what I don't want to get into. Oh, come on. One thing. Well, he says, sort of thought I'd be the apparatus. What do you mean, like the uneven parallel bars? See, the balance beam? Not the pommel horse. Jerry just wants to drop it. Asks Elaine, how long do I have to put in because of last night? I don't know, at least 3 weeks, she says. And she's like, you know what? That's such small potatoes. I might have single-handedly put the kibosh on a big water merger. And tells him, well, I started a whole name controversy. They hear Kramer yelling from across the hall, the stone. They run over there. No stone. Just failed reverse hecht. All right, my take on this scene, I don't think it really tracks that Jerry would be so hesitant to share his sexual expectations. His sexpectations with Elaine. Not sure why this was included in the scene, but it seems so unnecessary to me when he's like, you know what? I don't really want to talk about it. I don't think so. There's nothing really embarrassing about what he eventually admits. So I don't know. It just felt like weird filler dialogue to me. The exchange between Jerry and Elaine is funny when she's naming the different gymnastics apparati, I guess, plural of apparatuses. I don't know, whatever. But I do take issue with the mention of pommel horse, since that is not a part of women's gymnastics, just men's. But from a comedy writing perspective, pommel horse sounds way funnier than vault or floor, so I accept it. Sometimes you got to go with the funnier choice, even if it's not accurate. Writing wisdom. I do feel like the length of time after sex conversation, like how much time does he have to put in? It comes up a few times in the series, and I like that Jerry asks Elaine her opinion on this. I like that they bounce it off each other, like, how long do I have to put in now? All right, next we're on the street. George has gotten Lindsay some flowers. He's strolling down the street with the coffee, takes a sip, and apparently it's disgusting. So he just dumps it out onto the windshield of a guy. And the guy's in the car and he's understandably pissed. George apologizes and starts cleaning it up with a newspaper from the trash. A lot of George getting stuff out of the trash this episode. Well, of course, who is across the street and spots him but Mrs. Enright? And of course is horrified by this scene. And George sees her and starts chasing her. Mrs. Enright! All right, next we're at Jerry's apartment. Back in the same position as before, George on the phone with Lindsay on the couch with Jerry sitting next to him. George is explaining what happened, and somehow she gives him another chance. Very forgiving, Lindsay. Kramer enters, asks Jerry what he's doing later. Well, going out with Katya, thanks to you. Kramer tells him to try again. The first time can be a little awkward. No way, Jerry says, and I'll have to put in more time. He says he's going to the circus with her because one of her old friends is an acrobat. Oh, Jerry doesn't even want to go. But he says, you know what, Kramer, because of you, I have to do this, so you're going to come with me. Kramer does not want to go. I'm afraid of clowns. Next, we're in Mr. Pitt's office. Mr. Pitt is reprimanding Elaine for what she did at the meeting. And I couldn't help it. Moland? He likes it. He came up with it. And she apologizes again. Well, he's going riding. He hasn't been on his horse Jenny for 3 days because of this blasted 3D poster. The phone rings. Elaine. Oh, sorry. We see Mr. Pitt walking out, but then he hesitates, looks back. He's starting to see something in the picture. My take on this scene, there's not much to say again, it's a short scene, but I find it so funny that after one ring, Mr. Pitt's like, Elaine, as if it's been ringing 7 or 8 times and she's just sitting there. And she even apologizes. Oh, sorry. I'm like, it just rang once. But this is what I mean. I love how irritated he is with Elaine. Like there's just the level of irritation's already at like a 7 or an 8 with nothing happening. And then and then it just like shoots up if something slightly, wrong happens. But yeah, ring, Elaine is another one of his quirks maybe to answer before the phone rings. Like it's so hilarious. All right, next we're at the circus. Kramer is getting freaked out by all the clowns that are walking by. Katya asks Jerry if he's enjoying the circus. Best show on earth. And she tells him a charming story about her elephant-hating father, whatever. Misha, her friend, comes out and greets her. She introduces him to Jerry, and he's not very thrilled. Ah, yes, the comedian, huh? Next, we're at Mr. Pitt's office. Oh my gosh, Mr. Pitt is still looking at this picture. He's on to something. Elaine is excited by that phone call. She tells Mr. Pitt that the board of directors have called an emergency meeting to discuss the merger. He's not even hearing her. He's just so focused on this 3D art picture. Elaine tries to take a message, reaches into her purse, and her hands come out all covered in ink from the fountain pen she threw in there earlier. Uh-oh. She tells them on the phone that he'll be there, flings the phone from her ear, starts yelling at Mr. Pitt, "You've got to stop staring at that poster." Again, still he's not listening. Finally, Elaine's had enough. She takes it from him, breaks it, throws it, grabs him by the lapels, shakes him to snap out of the trance, tells him he has to meet with the shareholders. "Do you hear me? You have to leave now." Finally, he does snap out of it, and he straightens himself out, touching the ink that Elaine got on his lapels. She says the meeting's in 20 minutes. He touches his lip, leaving an ink blot above his lips. Does he have time to change? Oh, no. Elaine sees the Hitler mustache ink blot and says no. So he starts to leave in a rush. She stops him, tries to point on her face to indicate that he has something on his face. He sees her hands. "Is that ink?" No. And he rushes out. My take on this scene, meh. This scene is okay. Honestly, I'm just sort of tiring of the whole Mr. Pitt entranced by the 3D poster. It was stale like the second scene, and I'm just not loving it by this point. The whole ink and Hitler mustache thing, it's just too broad for me. It's not my favorite. I do like that we got to see JLD do some physical comedy here, that grabbing the poster, putting her knee through it, grabbing Mr. Pitt, very fun. So that part I like, but overall, it's not my favorite. Right, next we're in George's car. Lindsay and George have had a date, and she invites him up to her mother's place. They're having a party. Maybe I could just use the bathroom. Sure. All right, next we are at the circus just really quickly. Misha is announced, and he goes out to do his act. And then we're at Mrs. Enright's party. George is waiting to use the bathroom. A guy comes out. He apologizes for taking so long. They have one of those 3D art posters in there. It's mesmerizing. Back at the circus, Kramer starts getting intense pain and he goes into the bathroom. We see Misha balancing on the high wire and Kramer starts screaming like a blood-curdled scream while passing his stone, causing Misha to fall. All right, back at Mrs. Enright's party, George exits the bathroom with no shirt on, asking, "Did everyone see that poster in there? That's weird, wild stuff." Then he slowly realizes he forgot to put his shirt back on and tries to act casual. All right, next we're at the shareholders meeting. Mr. Pitt is giving an impassioned speech saying the stock will rise high with a Heil Hitler hand gesture. There is a tag to the episode where Katya tells Jerry she's going to be with Misha now. He's going to be okay. And she breaks up with him because Jerry didn't live up to the Romanian lore of comedians being magical lovers. And then we see Kramer leaving the bathroom, all smiles, whistling, now that his stone has passed. All right, I'm going to take a quick break, and I will see you on the other side. Hello, my name is Justin Pitt, business mogul, entrepreneur, and avid pencil advocate. As a boy, I had a traumatic experience with a fountain pen, one that caused my father to shun me for many years. And because of that, I vowed never to use ink pen in my personal or professional life. But in 1994, I met a woman named Elaine Bennis, and she would eventually become my personal assistant and like a daughter to me. Elaine never held back her opinions, and one day she told me that I would never be taken seriously in the business world just using pencils. Knowing my aversion to ink, she helped me come up with the leak-proof ink pen, which I combined into the name Loufinken. Made with the same technology as an astronaut pen, the Loufinken can be thrown, sat on, chewed, and it will never leak a drop of ink. Before Elaine and I had an unfortunate falling out when she tried to kill me, we enjoyed many years innovating leak-proof ink technology from the original Loufinken to the Loufinken Hydro, which not only never leaks, but also writes underwater. You can find all models of Loufinken at your local stationery store. Just look for the section marked Piness. My idea combining Pitt and Bennis. Loufinken by Piness. There's nothing to smear but smear itself. And we're back. There were really no notable extras for this episode, so we're going to go on and I'm going to find... Oh, there it is. I found Greg's sack lunch. For those of you who might be new to the podcast, Greg is our most dedicated contributor to this podcast, and he has his own segment. It's called Greg's Sack Lunch. And the first thing I find in Greg's sack are his favorite Elaine scene and Elaine moments. He says, "My favorite storyline of the episode is George's. I think being caught eating garbage is just so funny and such a George thing to happen. Everything else is kind of weak, especially Jerry and the gymnast, for which the episode is named. Kramer, of course, has some kind of body issue, which seems to happen whenever they need something for him to do. My favorite Elaine moments are between her and Mr. Pitt, which is such a great relationship on the show. The best scene is when Elaine finally snaps and breaks the magic eye poster and screams some sanity into Mr. Pitt. It's very physical and she pulls off panic mode so well. I wonder how many takes they did this in and how many times they started laughing. Ian Abercrombie as Mr. Pitt is hilarious throughout this whole episode. I can't imagine anyone else playing this character. Perfect casting." Yes, I completely agree. I think I pretty much said the same thing. I'm not a fan of the Mr. Pitt and Elaine stuff. I hate the gymnast stuff. Yeah, George once again has the best plot of the episode. Greg goes on to say, another moment I like is Elaine and Jerry discussing his sexual experience with the gymnast. It's funny that he's even discussing this with Elaine and not George or Kramer, but I like how she somewhat mocks what his expectations were. Totally. I touched a little bit on how I didn't love the hesitation for him to talk about this with her. But maybe that's why. Maybe it's because it was Elaine and not George and Kramer. I think he would have just blurted out, with them, his expectations. But I think I still stand by what I say, though. I don't see at this level of their friendship him being like, I really don't want to discuss this. It's like, nah, we're past that, guys. Next in Greg's sack is his scene swap idea. The whole gymnast storyline takes up too much time. I can't complain about anything between George and Mrs. Enright. I love everything there. Instead of Jerry's date scenes, I'd rather have had Elaine involved in George's storyline. Her opinions on him eating garbage and taking his shirt off while he uses the restroom would be fun to hear. Oh my gosh. There's no way you can know my final thoughts in this episode, but we're pretty much in total agreement. And I just want to mention, for maybe any new listeners out there, I never read Greg's thoughts before I'm recording the podcast. So I'm hearing all this for the first time. So it is sort of amazing how much you're really echoing stuff I'm going to say here in just a few minutes. Finally, in Greg's sack are his extra thoughts. He says, one of the things I've never loved about this episode was how Elaine acted in the meeting with the water company execs. She's downright goofy when she says, let's swap some stock. You don't know these people and you're acting like a complete goofball over something very important. She plays it hilariously. I just didn't like the choice to make her character act in such a way. Her asking about the name didn't bother me so much because that was a fair question, but then her vocally saying she didn't like it was not her place. I see what you're saying, Greg, but I think there would be no comedy in there. I think, again, my whole point was the gum chewing and just kind of, like you said, kind of goofy in this meeting. There's something about her relationship with Mr. Pitt and people like him, these older men like him. She just reverts back to this kind of immature, girly, goofy persona, which I'm kind of here for. I mean, I love our strong, badass Elaine, but I love that she has this side too, where she's like, I don't really give a shit about this job. This is not my dream job, so I'm not really going to put too much effort into this. And so, yeah, I totally accept it for everything it is, and I find it hilarious. And finally, Greg says, another last thought is on the Magic Eye posters. I remember this fad well, and the local mall I went to in Michigan growing up had a whole store specifically selling these. And I'll be damned, I was much like Mr. Pitt. I could never see the goddamn things. Oh, ho, ho. You would have been pissed off with me, Greg. I would have been Kramer or Elaine to you because I could just like that. I was like, oh, I see it. Oh, I see it. Yep, that's Saturn. Yeah, that's the solar system. Yeah, that's a vintage car. Yeah, I just was a master. I was a master. And are you talking about Oakland Mall? Sorry, everyone, 99% of you who don't know what I'm talking about. But I think I know which store you're talking about. And yeah, I used to go there all the time. I'd be like, do you guys have any new ones? Because I've seen all of these. Thank you so much, Greg, for your thoughts. And now it's time to close Greg's sack lunch. My favorite Elaine moments, there's not much to choose from, but I have to say it's when she's teasing Jerry about having sex with Katya. That is a fun exchange. And a close second is the breakdown with Mr. Pitt and her snapping him out of that 3D art trance. I love the physicality of that scene. It's really, really well done by JLD. And in my final notes, well, like I just said, she gets some fun moments in this episode, but JLD's plot is very much a support role for Mr. Pitt's comedy. Like Ian Abercrombie, even though this plot isn't great, he crushes it with his frustration and obsession with 3D art. And again, there's nothing wrong with being a support role for that comedy. I just wish that the plot was better. And more Elaine ideas. Back to how much Greg and I agree, we didn't get any George and Elaine interaction. And any episode without George and Elaine interaction is weaker for it. I would have loved to hear her take on George eating out of the trash or giving advice to George about how to get Lindsay back. And to Greg's point, I didn't even put this in here, but yeah, dumping with no shirt on. Like, I would love to hear her take on that. Bottom line, we just needed more Elaine and way less Katya. And I think that's all I can say about the Gymnast. If you're not already, please follow Hot and Heavy on social media. On Instagram, you can find Hot and Heavy at Hot Heavy Elaine. On TikTok, at Elaine Bennis Podcast. And if you'd like to email me with any thoughts, please do at elainepodcast@gmail.com. That's elainepodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.